The aftermath of the 1976 firebombing of a home in Walton County, a firebombing that killed 5 children. Murder, drug dealing, stolen cars, hijacking gasoline from cross-country pipelines. All of these are crimes that law enforcement officials have associated with the so-called Dixie Mafia. A federal agent coined the name Dixie Mafia, but GBI Director Phil Peters says the Dixie Mafia doesn't have the traditional Sicilian-Italian ethnic background.
Generally, they're viewed as being southeastern United States grown people.
There's no single sinister leader like a godfather in the Dixie Mafia. However, there are other characteristics similar to the Rio Mafia.
Enforcers, collectors, people skilled in different types of criminal activity, and if a person is in something and they need someone with a skill they don't personally possess, they're able to affiliate with someone who does have that skill.
Peter says that historically, the law enforcement purist would say the Dixie Mafia has been concentrated in South Atlanta and East Point. But within the past 10 years, groups based north of Atlanta in Gwinnett, Banks, Barrow, Jackson, and Hall counties, the so-called Piedmont area of Georgia, have been called part of the Dixie Mafia. Peter says violating the law is a way of life, the way the members of the Dixie Mafia make their living.
But before the drug business became so lucrative and so widespread, it may have been burglary, prostitution, even some gambling, stolen goods, just a variety of illegal ways to make money.
It's hard for law enforcement officers to go after the Dixie Mafia as an organization, hard because it's such a loosely connected group. But Peter says when you find one member of the Dixie Mafia, you usually find another.
If you find one snake in the grass and you kill it, you better be careful because there's going to be another one nearby.
Don McClellan, Action News.
Not guilty.
That's John Oscar Luck of Clarkston, Georgia, reputed to be part of something called the Dixie Mafia, sort of a nebulous term used by police to describe some organized crime in the South. Louis Franklin Crump is also supposed to be part of that group. Both were ordered held without bond yesterday by a federal magistrate. Both are known to police in Georgia, Luck more so than Crump. At 52, John Luck is, as one police officer said, infamous. August 4th, 7:45 in the morning, the Star Castle nightclub is firebombed. John Luck and 2 others were indicted for that bombing on September 22nd. Luck was arrested September 23rd. Luck made bond, put at $50,000 by a federal judge on September 24th. At the time, Luck was on parole for bank robbery, federal parole that lasted until 1997. It was not revoked then. June 15th, 1981, John Luck's wife, Donna June, was one of 2 women found murdered in Gwinnett County. Just last week, John Luck was, ironically, a government witness at the murder trial of Dewey Poteet, who was found guilty. Yesterday, after his arrest, a warrant for parole violation was issued, and a hearing will be scheduled. It's examples such as this that rile government prosecutors.
We think it's wrong that drug dealers, alleged drug dealers, are able to put up $500,000 or $750,000 in cash and skip bail and be out on the street again to engage in their criminal activities.
The main charge stems from a police bust at the Lafayette, Georgia airport October 25th. John Luck and 6 others were arrested and then indicted, 4 counts each, of importing and intending to distribute 700 pounds of cocaine worth $300 million. Before that, Luck had been arrested and charged in connection with the August 4th bombing of the Star Castle Lounge in Atlanta. Luck was arrested September 22nd for the bombing, charged with 4 federal counts, and released on the 23rd on $50,000 bond. But it was the cocaine arrest that thrust Luck, reputed to be a member of the Dixie Mafia, into the limelight, with close examination of Luck's past revealing a criminal record that dated back to 1951 and includes murder, bank robbery, and a number of burglaries. All that was apparently too much for Luck's defense counsel. Federal Judge J. Owen Forrester was about 2 hours into the preliminary examination of the jurors when it became apparent many of them had heard of John Luck and the Star Castle, so Judge Forrester granted a motion that the trial be postponed until the publicity has died down.
Kramer has been charged with the bombing along with John Oscar Luck, another alleged member of the Dixie Mafia who is now serving time for dealing cocaine. Kramer has pleaded innocent to the bombing charge, but today the government's star witness says he was with Kramer when he did it. Lou Newland told the court he was offered $500 by John Luck last summer to construct a remote-controlled bomb to blow up the Star Castle. Using an elaborate model of the device, Newland described how he and Kramer wrapped 18 pounds of TNT around a can of gasoline, then attached a detonator to the top with duct tape. Newland says the device could then be set off with a remote-controlled transistor used to fly model airplanes. Who actually set off the explosive? Asked Assistant U.S. Attorney Janice Kaplan. Jimmy had the transmitter with the antenna stretched out the window, replied Newland. We drove by the club and he pulled the lever. Did Kramer ever indicate to you who was paying you to do the bombing? Kaplan asked. He seemed to indicate it was the man who owns the She Club who was the man who wanted to blow it up, replied Newland. At least that's my impression. The She Club is another nude dancing bar right across the street from the Star Castle. It is owned by Manny Isaacs. The two clubs are in fierce competition. Tomorrow it will be the defense's turn to call witnesses to the stand. If convicted of all the charges against him, Kramer could be sentenced to a maximum of 25 years in prison. At the federal courthouse, B.B. Emmerman, WSB News.
There are 8 people named in the indictment, but only 6 of them are on trial in Monroe, Georgia. All 6 are charged with racketeering, all charged under Georgia's RICO or anti-racket law. 3 of the suspects, Harold Chancey, Ruth Chancey, who is not being tried now, and Bobby Jean Goswick are charged with murder, specifically the 5 children of the James Thomas family. They died when their Walton County home burned on October 11, 1976. Prosecutor John Strauss told the jury, 8 men, 4 women, 8 whites, 4 blacks, that the Thomas house was on fire for 2 reasons: money from an insurance policy and because the Thomases were black, and that at least 2 of the defendants hate black people. Chief among the suspects in this case are Harold Chancey, alleged to be a kingpin in the so-called Dixie Mafia. In his opening statement today, Prosecutor John Strauss said he would prove the Chancey family was involved in drugs in the Southeast, drugs and theft, and ultimately arson and murder. Money that Harold Chancey needed to hire his attorney for another case. That brought a string of objections and calls for mistrials, but all were denied by Judge Greeley Ellis. The 6 attorneys that are making up the defense begin their opening statements tomorrow.
The state has a complicated case and has admitted that to the jury, and that means they will be sitting listening to all the complicated evidence for about the next 6 weeks, and maybe longer. In Monroe, Josh Lippman, WSB News. Attorney Jim Hudson, representing Catherine Collins, who is charged with racketeering, told the jury the state's proposed witnesses are, quote, very, very suspect, that the defense would be, quote, getting on the GBI hot and heavy here. And Hudson called one of the state's chief witnesses, Barbara Bell, a prostitute who made her living, quote, flat on her back. It was during Hudson's statement that he made reference to the Thomas youngsters who died in the 1976 fire, also a part of this case. Hudson said 4. That brought an outburst from James Thomas Jr., brother of the 5 children, that there were 5. The jury was sent out, and Judge Greeley Ellis told Thomas that if he wanted to stay in court, he would have to stay quiet. Later, attorney Ed Garland, who is representing Harold Chancey, alleged kingpin of the Georgia Mafia who is charged with murder and racketeering, Garland also attacked the credibility of Barbara Bell. Garland said that Chancey and Bell had an affair, and that once rejected, she was motivated to testify by, quote, greed, jealousy, hatred, and revenge. Other attorneys called the state's proposed witnesses jailhouse witnesses, cheap punks, unbelievable, and people who have, quote, crawled out from under rocks. The state's key witness, Barbara Bell, was back on the stand today. Yesterday, she told the court that Harold Chancey had told her he could burn down one of the Chancey family's rental homes to get rid of a black family living there. 5 children of the James Thomas family died in that fire. Today, the testimony was a bit more oblique, with prosecutor John Strauss questioning Barbara Bell about her relationship with Harold Chancey, about the fact that Chancey seemed to be carrying on 2 love affairs while still married, one with co-defendant Catherine Collins. Asked by Strauss why she, Barbara Bell, went along with Chancey's activities from October 1977 to March 1982, Bell said, I loved Harold Chancey. Prosecutor Strauss, was there anything else? Barbara Bell, later on, when he got involved in other things, I got scared. The jury spent part of its day going through evidence. The state's case is contained in many financial documents related to the Chancey family, and the jury spent 40 minutes looking at that. And following that, a man named Wayne Sims told the jury he rented another house from the Chanceys, and that the weekend he moved out, the house burned down.
Prosecutor John Strauss is taking his racketeering case step by step, carefully trying to prove that the defendants were all connected with various drug cases from 1977 to 1980. The testimony today was technical. A positive identification of fingerprints at the scene of a drug raid, the positive identification of marijuana and cocaine from drug raids, and reports of surveillance by the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. Every step of the way, the defense is trying to offset any damage by picking at those official reports, noting conflicts in dates and details. The state's star witness, Barbara Bell, spent 2 days on the stand earlier this week telling about Harold Chancey's alleged drug connections. The defense spent time trying to knock holes in her testimony. In fact, prosecutor John Strauss wanted to use Harold Chancey's character as evidence, but so far, Judge Greeley Ellis has said no.
It is possible that the jury is still wondering how all this fits. It is like a giant puzzle, and the jury has only seen a few of the pieces. The fact of the matter is, the state has called less than 100 of its proposed 300 witnesses, and there are indications late today that the state may be wrapping up its case next week. In Monroe, Josh Flipman, WSB News. Where the Thomas family lived, having rented a house from the Chancey family in 1976, where they lived is nothing more than an empty field now. Weeds cover the lot, where in October 1976, 5 children died in a fire that experts have testified was arson. Today, Jeanette Thomas, the mother of the victims, dramatically recalled the night the house burned, that she had been sleeping with her husband when, quoting now, "I heard a crash, and then I heard a whoosh sound, and everything lit up. I hit my husband and hollered, 'Something's happened.'" Jeanette and her husband, James, escaped the flames, tripping over a gas can outside as they did. Mrs. Thomas says her husband picked up the gas can and screamed to her, "Jeanette, someone is trying to burn us out. Someone is trying to burn us out." This morning, the jury looked at slides of the fire scene, pictures that clearly showed what had once been a 2-story home, nothing but a pile of charred rubble, little left standing except some wall beams. Prosecutor John Strauss had wanted to show the jury pictures of the victims' bodies in the rubble, but Judge Greeley Ellis said no. Fire investigator John Yearwood from the State Fire Marshal's office testified, however, the bodies of the victims were, quote, "badly burned, beyond recognition." Yearwood also testified the Thomas family home, owned by the Chanceys, burned the same way the Chancey family home in Statham had burned that same night, by gasoline being thrown into the house and set afire. Both fires, Yearwood said, were arson. Prosecutor John Strauss fought long and hard to have the testimony of 21-year-old Charles Gregory Smith heard in front of the jury. Smith was a prisoner at the Monroe County Jail in October 1982 for failing to pay child support. He was a trustee. Smith told the court that while in jail in Monroe, he drank and smoked marijuana with defendant Bobby Jean Goswick and his cellmate Terry Bennett. Bennett is not connected with this case. And that while they were drinking and smoking, Goswick talked about the fatal fire at the Thomas home. Smith said, referring to Goswick, quote, "He said he did it, but he didn't know the children were in there." And that the next day, Goswick changed his story and told Smith he did not do it. Smith also said that after he was moved to another prison, that a relative of Goswick's in prison told Smith to keep his mouth shut, and that if he didn't, quoting Smith, "I'd be killed." During intense cross-examination from the defense, Smith changed details of his story but didn't waver on his statement until attorney Jim Hudson asked, could he, meaning Goswick, could he have said, "I wouldn't burn down any house with kids in it"? Smith, "I guess so."
The heavy snow in Monroe delayed the start of the trial this morning by 40 minutes. But once underway, the state's star witness, Barbara Bell, was once again on the stand, and under the gun from defense attorney Ed Garland. Garland, like the other attorneys, keyed in on Bell's testimony about Harold Chancey's alleged drug connections. Garland hit hard on the fact that when Harold Chancey allegedly picked up bags of money, Bell didn't really know it was money. Barbara Bell, "I just about bet my life it was money." Garland, "No, you imagined it was money. You didn't see it, you didn't count it." Later, Garland got Bell to admit that on the night of the fatal fire at the Thomas house, the one that killed 5 children, Harold Chancey told her that he and Bobby Jean Goswick had been out delivering illegal liquor. That brought a series of calls for mistrials from one other defense attorney, since Chancey is not being tried for moonshining. It has also severely split the defense on how to handle this case. But the jury doesn't know that. They were out of the courtroom when the judge ruled the testimony would be admissible. They heard the alibi, but not the argument against it. In Monroe, Josh Lippman, WSB News. Herman Dunnigan, a convicted armed robber, connected Bobby Jean Goswick and Harold Chansey to marijuana sales, specifically that Goswick, quote, unloaded a truckload of pot for Harold Chansey. Another key witness for the state, Diana Jordan, ex-wife of defendant Audie Jordan, testified for the first time. She was given immunity this morning. Admittedly testifying with, quote, some reluctance, Diana Jordan told about her husband's alleged drug connections with Harold Chansey and Charles Cagle. Jordan, he was a liaison, so to speak, between Chansey and the group in Florida. Prosecutor John Strauss, what type of business were they in? Jordan, it was drug-related. Strauss, what kind of connections? Jordan, that he knew some Cubans they were involved in importing. Strauss, importing what? Jordan, drugs. Defense attorney Doug McDonald tried to separate his client, Charles Cagle, from any of those connections. Diana Jordan admitting she never saw Cagle process, sell, or transport drugs.
Jody Cagle is surely one of the state's most important witnesses. An unindicted co-conspirator granted immunity from prosecution. Jody Cagle admitted being the, quote, banker of the alleged drug ring. She virtually connected each of the defendants in the case. That Harold Chansey, Charles Cagle, her ex-husband, and Audie Jordan bought and sold marijuana and cocaine. That Jody Cagle held the money for them, sometimes as much as $500,000 in cash she kept in a suitcase under her bed. Question from Prosecutor John Strauss. Did Charles Cagle ever state to you what this money was for? Answer from Jody Cagle. To buy drugs. Jody Cagle testified that Harold Chansey, Charles Cagle, and her used cocaine, and that she and Audie Jordan cut or diluted the cocaine for sale. That one night, Harold Chansey, Horace Hutchinson, and Kathy Collins came to her home and picked up 3 ounces of cocaine. Strauss. Were there times when Charles Cagle would make sales? Jody Cagle, yes. About the day of the fatal fire at the Thomas residence in 1976, Jody Cagle said Harold Chansey came to her house and put on the TV news to see the story about the fire. Question, what was Harold's reaction? Answer, he stood there and said, that's my mother's house. Question, what was his expression? Answer, he wasn't smiling, but he wasn't unhappy, more like a smirk. For the jury, the morning was spent going in and out of the courtroom while attorneys argued over the latest testimony from Jody Cagle. Prosecutor John Strauss wanted the jury to hear about the night Kathy Collins was shot in a motel room. They did not hear that story. Strauss wanted Jody Cagle to further state her feelings about the night Harold Chansey told her about the fatal fire that killed the Thomas children. With the jury out of the room, Cagle told the court her reaction was that he, Harold Chansey, quote, knew more about it than I did. The jury did not hear that testimony either. Defense attorney Douglas McDonald wanted the jury to hear about a threat Jody Cagle made to Harold Chansey to, quote, either pay me or I'm going to testify. The jury did hear that. And through it all, Jody Cagle was today defensive and pensive. She never looked at defense attorneys cross-examining her. She was finally excused late in the morning. Then with his final witness, GBI agent Chris Comer, Prosecutor Strauss detailed the telephone records of toll calls allegedly made by people connected with the case, defendants, unindicted co-conspirators, and others. The effort was to finally connect all 6 defendants in a racketeering enterprise. Important evidence from 18,000 total phone calls needed to prove the RICO case. But telephone records that, on the other hand, do not really show who called who or what was talked about. Judge Greeley Ellis may have only slightly understated the case when he told the returning jury this morning, we've been very busy. Ellis informed the jury that Horace Hutchinson and Catherine Collins had both been acquitted, and that all of the racketeering charges against Bobby Jean Goswick had been dropped. Goswick and Harold Chansey are still charged with 4 counts of murder. In addition, Chansey, Charles Cagle, and Audie Jordan are still charged with racketeering. Then Bobby Jean Goswick took the stand in his own defense. He told the court that the night the 5 Thomas children died in a fire, he had gone first to Dawsonville, then to McDonough Boulevard near Grant Park in Atlanta to deliver illegal liquor. That he met with a man named Jabbo and then drove back to the Chansey farm and slept in the barn until 7 or 8 a.m. Question from attorney Frank Martin. Do you have any personal knowledge of who set the fire? Goswick, no, sir. Do you know who set the fire? No, sir. Under cross-examination from Prosecutor John Strauss, Goswick admitted lying to police about running illegal liquor to protect Harold Chansey. Strauss, would you do anything Harold told you to? Goswick, no. Strauss, But you would run liquor for him. Goswick, yes. Even if it meant prison? That's all I've done all my life. Goswick denied ever telling state witness Charles Smith he set the fire with Harold Chancey, denied he was with Harold Chancey all night as Barbara Bell had testified, denied bringing drug money to Jody Cagle as she had testified, and denied ever seeing any marijuana at the Chancey farm. Then racketeering defendant Charles Cagle took the stand. His attorney, Douglas McDonald, only asked him 5 short questions, the last one being, with regard to those acts you are charged with, are you guilty of those charges? Charles Cagle, no, sir. During cross-examination, Cagle confidently said he was never in the drug business with Harold Chancey or Audie Jordan, denied ever using cocaine, denied ever seeing it, and in regards to the explicit drug business testimony of ex-wife Jody Cagle, Charles Cagle said she lied. Cagle also denied beating up Jody Cagle and said other state witnesses who mentioned his name also lied. The key witness for Harold Chancey's defense today, his wife, Nancy Chancey. She was indicted in this case for racketeering but was not tried. She told the jury she is not guilty of racketeering. She also testified that on the night of the Thomas residence fire, Harold was in bed with her, that he learned of the fire when Ruth Chancey called, and that he was badly shaken by the deaths of the 5 children. Prosecutor John Strauss gets the first and last crack at the jury, and during his morning closing argument thanked the jury for their patience. But, said Strauss, we brought you enough to make a decision. The defense will argue reasonable doubt. Use your common sense. And that's exactly what the defense did, starting with attorney Frank Martin, who was representing murder suspect Bobby Jean Goswick. Quote, the defense is very simple. He's not guilty because he has an alibi. He wasn't there. You cannot be guilty of a crime unless you're there to commit it. During a 1-hour speech, Martin said the race issue in the murder case, the fact that the 5 Thomas children who died were black, and suspects Goswick and Harold Chancey are white, the race issue was, quote, a cover-up for the lack of facts. Martin called the case a misuse of power, that DA John Strauss misused immunity for state witnesses. Quote, the DA's case is not made up of facts, just habitual criminals. Attorney Jerry Field represented racketeering defendant Audie Jordan. There was no defense put up for his case, no testimony by Jordan because, Field said, it was because of his 2 young sons. About ex-wife Diana Jordan, Field said, quote, she made assumptions, and as we all know, still quoting, hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. Field said there was no evidence Jordan was a racketeer, that the state used suppositions and inference on inference for its case. For racketeering defendant Charles Cagle, attorney Douglas McDonald spent an hour hitting hard at the state's witnesses. In an impassioned voice, McDonald said, quote, Mr. Strauss wants to win to get this case off the books. Don't fall for the state's strategy. Don't be hoodwinked. No man is guilty by association alone. McDonald even mentioned the Dixie Mafia. He said to the jury, quote, you have to absolutely disregard that. And then said, it's hard to defend against a lie. I'm going to leave you with my client's life. And then, finally for the defense, Ed Garland, and closing arguments for murder suspect Harold Chancey. Garland spent most of his hour before the jury defending the murder charges, and also came down hard on state witnesses, especially Barbara Bell, with whom Chancey had a love affair. He called her, quote, a woman with many faces, and said her testimony could not be believed. Garland, he was two-timing her, but we're not trying him for that. I say plainly the state has not proved the murder case against Harold Chancey in any respect. Garland said it would not make any sense to burn a house for insurance money when the Chanceys had lots of money from bootlegging, especially when Harold Chancey was already on probation, and said Chancey had never had any racial hatred for the Thomas family. Garland, pointing to the empty witness chair, the testimony of Harold Chancey from this stand was the truth. It took Judge Greeley Ellis better than 2 hours to give the jury instructions on how to deliberate this case. Even that seemingly routine task was delayed by more than an hour because of defense objections to a missing piece of evidence, a yellow sheet of paper allegedly written by racketeering defendant Audie Jordan detailing a drug transaction. So defense attorney Douglas McDonald cross-examined court clerk Thomas Batchelor, and prosecutor John Strauss cross-examined co-defense counsel Donald Samuel and co-prosecutor Charles Olson. In the end, Judge Ellis ruled the Xerox copy, now in the file, was accurate and could stay. The jury never heard all that, but the rest of the court was left with the impression that the last to handle the original paper were the defendants. But there were no accusations or charges. It was after all that the jury finally got control of the case, an effort to discuss what for 4 weeks they could not, an effort to sort through the complicated racketeering charges and the 4 counts of murder they are faced with deciding upon. At noon today, the jury filed into the courtroom after nearly 9 hours of actual deliberations. They reported to Judge Greeley Ellis they had been able to reach a decision on the racketeering charges against Harold Chancey, Charles Cagle, and Audie Jordan. But the jury foreman reported they had not been able to reach a decision on the murder charges against Chancey and co-defendant Bobby Jean Goswick. Judge Ellis told the jury to take a lunch break and then to try again on the murder charges. So once again, the 4 defendants were taken back to jail to await a decision. Judge Ellis watched from a second-floor courtroom window. Chancey, Goswick, Cagle, and Jordan have been at the jail all during deliberations, only being brought to the courthouse for jury questions. Then at 4:30, the jury reported it was hopelessly deadlocked. After a flurry of attorney conferences and a bench conference, Judge Greeley Ellis declared a mistrial on the 4 murder counts against Harold Chancey and Bobby Jean Goswick. The jury did decide on the racketeering charges. For Harold Chancey, guilty. For Audie Jordan, guilty. For Charles Cagle, guilty. Prosecutor John Strauss said he has not decided if he will retry the murder case.
We're going to study it. It'll also be considered in light of the reactions of our witnesses, the reactions of the Thomas family itself, the type of sentence a judge would give on the RICO, and other factors that we want to look at just to study and make sure that we're doing the right thing.
There was never any real evidence, a smoking gun against Harold Chancey, on the left, or Bobby Jean Goswick. Never any physical evidence that placed the two at the murder scene. There was basically the testimony of Chancey's ex-lover, Barbara Bell, who said that Harold said he could burn them out, referring to the Thomas family. There was testimony of convicted arsonist and unindicted co-conspirator Larry Hart, who told of a meeting between Chancey and another man where Chancey asked advice about arson fires. Hart is a witness that defense attorney Ed Garland wants to confront again.
Well, we know now where they have dredged up their witness out of the penitentiary system, and we will know a great deal more about him that we can present to a jury the next time.
That may not have been the only downfall of the murder case. The jury's hesitation, although unstated, may have been what they were thinking deep inside. Goswick defense attorney Frank Martin.
There was no real murder case. They didn't present one at all. But I think that the jurors were hung up on pretrial matters that they just couldn't put out of their mind. And I think that they couldn't bring themselves to convict, and they couldn't bring themselves to acquit. So they stopped right where they started.
There may also have been a technical reason for the hung jury. Follow this. Harold Chancey and Bobby Jean Goswick were both indicted for the murders, both 4 counts. They were both indicted for racketeering, 1 count. Within that racketeering charge, there was the 5th murder charge, part of the alleged enterprise. Then last Tuesday, Judge Ellis directed a verdict of not guilty of racketeering against Bobby Jean Goswick. That left him to only defend 4 counts of murder. The jury may have wondered, if Bobby Jean Goswick is not guilty of 1 count of murder, even if it is in the racketeering charge, then how can he be guilty of the other 4 murders? And if Goswick is not guilty, then how can the jury convict Chancey, who was allegedly with Goswick? That leaves Prosecutor John Strauss in the position of having to decide if there is enough murder evidence to try the case on its own merits.
We're going to study it. It'll also be considered in light of the reactions of our witnesses, the reactions of the Thomas family itself, the type of sentence a judge would give on the RICO, and other factors that we want to look at just to study and make sure that we're doing the right thing. Also, depending on the situs of the trial, if the venue is moved someplace else, that might have a lot to do with it also.